I don't think there's such a thing as work-life balance. I think there's what's right for you situationally at a particular time without losing sight of your North Star. What I think employers have to do is create the space for people to be able to make those decisions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of No Definition. I'm Amanda Malco, and each episode I sit down with some of the most successful and inspiring women out there and invite them to share their stories and advice on how to make it all work. This week, our guest is Sarah Hofstetter, a true legend in the advertising and marketing world.
I'm a mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, I'm a podcast host, I've been a CEO, I am a board member, but my big pride and joy, I'm a mom of 2 kids. Abby will be 27 in June, and Sam will be 25 in August.
Sarah is currently a senior advisor at Boston Consulting Group and the co-founder of 37 Arc. She's also a board member at Campbell and Kenvue. And throughout her career, she's led companies through significant transformations and great financial outcomes. And she's built incredible cultures. I know this because she's also one of the women I've worked most closely with. I worked alongside Sarah for nearly 8 years at the digital marketing agency 360i that was bought by Dentsu. And if you've ever worked for someone like Sarah, you know what a gift it is. Today, we're going to get into some deep stuff. Where ambition comes from in early childhood, how to talk to your kids about work, and perhaps most importantly, how do you build a workplace culture where working parents can thrive and companies can retain top talent? Let's get to it.
So both of my kids work at ad agencies, Sam in paid media, Abby in earned media, period, full stop. And they don't work at the same company, but they are both in the industry that I spent most of their formative years being in.
Would you have ever predicted that when you were in the thick of it and they were watching you build?
Absolutely not. The ad agency life is extremely demanding, and I probably had a ridiculous amount of self-doubt when the kids were young about my ability to be there for them, especially compared to a lot of the other moms that they were exposed to. So the fact that they both opted into this post-grad is surprising, not because they don't have the talent or the creativity or anything like that, just because it's extremely demanding work. I was stressed a lot during their early years, and I'm surprised that they went into it, but they both seem to be really happy. So God bless.
Have they talked at all about what inspired that in them? I mean, again, I have to believe that watching their mom do this had to be a big informative reason, but I'm curious if they're self-admitting that at all.
I think it's probably better to ask them that question. I think when I ask it, there's probably a different answer than when somebody else asks them. So I don't know where the middle lies, but there's always a little nature, always a little nurture involved in these kinds of things.
It's interesting for people who are in the thick of it now. There's a lot of thought about what is the impression we're giving on our kids, especially as we're working. And so I think there's something really nice about thinking like a big part of this is we're inspiring them and maybe even inspiring their future careers, which is kind of exciting to think about. I don't know. I think about that.
I agree. It definitely does. And I saw that more with my daughter than with my son, largely because I sent my daughter to an all-girls high school. While there was a lot of really great stuff about that school, it unfortunately had undertones, which I did not realize at the time, of serious chauvinism. I learned in parent-teacher conferences, she was always anything a guy can do, a girl can do. Like, there's really no reason. And whenever those kinds of situations came up, she was extremely vocal about women's capability, capacity, et cetera. And I definitely believe I had something to do with it because that doesn't just come from within, but you can say all the things, but what you do is completely so much more important.
Yeah. And I think that ability to have that confidence and push back at an early age is incredible, really important, and obviously something she picked up on from you, but I'm sure has paid off because there's a confidence that goes into being an adult in the world that is sometimes built over time. And so to have a leg up on that is helpful.
You never know as a parent, like I could have said the same thing 1,000 times to them and they may or may not have picked up on it. You never know. And I'm sure you see this with Miles. You never know what's the thing that they take. You're never really gonna know But sometimes you like look back and I will reminisce with my kids about stuff in their childhood. We have version control issues for sure, but the things that they remember as super pivotal may not be the same things that I remember as super pivotal. And it's surprising, but there's nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. Everybody creates their own memories and hardwires certain things that drive them forward. I had this with my dad. A couple of years ago, I was talking to my dad and I was mentioning something that he had said to me, I thought 1,000 times growing up. He said to me, I have two jobs for you. Marry rich and make me a grandfather before I'm 40. And I hear it. I hear him in my head. And of course, I did neither. I remember when he turned 40 and where I was in life, and I was not ready to get married. By the way, it wasn't that far off. I definitely didn't marry rich, but the thinking that that is the North Star and he has no recollection of this at all is indicative of so much.
It really is. I remember I was actually thinking about it this morning. It's a funny thing. It's my parallel story to that is my dad, who was always such a champion for me, but he said one thing to me. I know he only said it once, but I remind him of it regularly. I was getting ready to go off to college, and he said, I want to make sure you know you need to hang around the business school so you can meet someone who's going to be really financially successful. So I want you to like go there every day after class and just like hang out. And it was like such an odd thing for a dad who up until this point was very like, go, you can be whatever you want, but also go meet the rich guy and hang outside the business school because that's where they're going to be. And I'll never forget it. I don't know what gave me the gall at 18. I looked at him and I said, you don't understand. I'm going to be the rich guy outside the business school. And he like, to this day, he's like, that was such an aha because I realized you didn't want to marry someone like me. You wanted to be me, which is a much more flattering thing. But also, I should have realized that all along.
Sometimes life teaches you lessons of what to do, but more often than not, what not to do. I think one of the things that's driven me professionally was that when my parents got divorced when I was 13, my mom was not financially stable. So I was just like, I don't want to be dependent on anyone for my financial status, good or bad. And that was a big driver for me professionally.
To have those early formative experiences, usually that drive comes from somewhere. And in these conversations, I've definitely noticed everyone's very ambitious, and that ambition comes usually from some sort of deep seated place in childhood. And it sounds like part of that for you was your parents' situation. Part of it for me was definitely watching my dad and mom together build a business, thinking about that and like, how does that impact our children? They're always watching. And obviously, your kids definitely were watching their mom and taking many, many lessons from that, clearly. You mentioned pivotal moments. So maybe that's a good segue. I ask everybody this, which is there a pivotal moment in your journey to balance career and motherhood that really stands out to you? And it could be pivotal in a, hey, this was a really, blessed, wonderful time, or it could be pivotal in a, this was a really challenging time, but something that maybe sparked a shift in you in some way.
Okay, I'm gonna pick one from before I was a mother that impacted a lot of things about how I operated going forward. But I was pregnant, so I found out I was pregnant with Abby, and I went to go tell my boss that I was pregnant. He had a not so positive reaction, let's just say. Shortly thereafter, I was trying to figure out what the situation was with mat leave, and this was 1999. So the parental leave policies weren't particularly generous. I was guaranteed to have my title when I came back, but not necessarily the same job. And I was not going to get any payment over the course of the 12 weeks that I was out. They kind of, for lack of a better term, bribed me and said, if you come back after 6 weeks, we will pay all 6 weeks. If you come back after 12, we will pay none. And we can't guarantee that you are going to be doing the same thing, but we can guarantee that you will have the same title. And money was tight. I was pregnant at 24. We needed my salary. So I went back after 6 weeks. I remember going back. And by the way, if you think my performance was good at that point, I was pissed because who wants to go back to work after 6 weeks after having a kid? Just physically, I drove to work back then. I was working in New Jersey and I was living in Queens. Just sitting in the commute in a car for that period of time going back and forth, I was so physically uncomfortable after delivery. this is really hard. And it wasn't because I needed to maintain some sort of fantastic lifestyle. I was in a rent controlled apartment in Queens, but it's what needed to happen. And it was so bitter. But what were my options at that point? Because at that point, I had a little kid. I didn't really have a lot of alternatives. So I stayed, but I can tell you, I certainly could not have been a high performer at that time. And it was a lesson to me.
Yeah, and certainly not motivated by the leader or the culture after that, and certainly not in the same way.
Well, I'm also kind of a dummy because I stayed there through my second kid too, and I did the same thing a second time. So I don't have a good explanation for that one.
Well, I think at that time, it wasn't unusual. I mean, at least in my experiences and in talking to others.
I should have taken the 12 weeks. I don't know why I was so debt averse. It's not like I come from a family of indebted people or anything like that. I just was debt averse. I only wanted to spend the money I had. Could we have, could we have borrowed money so that I could have taken those full 12 weeks off? Possibly. I didn't want to ask for help from anyone.
The idea to position it as like you had to ask for help, and really, who could have given you that is the employer who was forcing the situation sort of in the first place, right?
No, I would have had to borrow money from family in order to
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 make
to
it
cover
work.
myself
Yeah.
over the course of those 12 weeks, but
Mhm.
yeah, it wasn't a psychologically safe environment.
Clearly, you still kind of reflect on, could I have done things differently? I think certainly they could have done things differently. I think, and hopefully in today's environment, that would be very different. But
Oh, yeah.
we're still in a country, that doesn't mandate any of that. So we've only come so far. But how does that shape your outlook and maybe even your leadership?
I don't think that there are women today in their childbearing years that don't find out about the policy beforehand, whereas I was 21 when I had started working there, and it's not that I didn't think I was gonna have kids, it's just that just didn't go into my head, so I just think that women today are smarter, more aware, and there are competitive packages out there, which is really good. But in the same way that you want to give your kids things that you didn't have, I wanted to give my future employees things I didn't have. And so once I was in a position of power to be able to do that, that became something I had to figure out how to do. Also, it's not just about making better parental leave policies, but also, anytime somebody told me they were pregnant, regardless of what the business impact was going to be, which by the way, I can go off on a rant on how it's actually really great, but I would, if they allowed, would just hug and be excited. And it was never forced, it was never faked or anything like that. I was just so genuinely happy that they were going to have the opportunity to really enjoy those early weeks and months, both to take care of themselves and also form a bond with their child. So I wanted to make sure that when I became in a position of being able to call the shots, that I'd be able to do that, but also to just be able to celebrate somebody's pregnancy, not say, oh crap, what am I going to do about this now? And sometimes people will say to me, like quietly, oh, by the way, I don't have such great news. So and so is pregnant. And I'm like, that's great news. And it's not just that it's great news for humanity, but frankly, for business. If somebody tells you they're pregnant and they're, 4 or 5 months along, you got a long runway to plan. Somebody gives you 2 weeks notice, then you got a problem.
That's so true. There's many reasons employees might be going out on some sort of leave or leaving you. Being pregnant is a wonderful reason and something you can absolutely plan for. And they're going to come back, especially if you handle it well.
They're going to come back. Or if they're not, you've already built this environment of trust that people will feel much more comfortable saying, you know what, I actually don't know if I'm going to come back. And again, it's about psychological safety, creating an environment where people feel comfortable being able to tell you things so that you can then plan. Because it's so interesting when people leave jobs, it says so much about them. I always say people remember how you left, not nearly as much about your tenure and your impact. When you left 360i, I mean, months. And I'm not saying most people could do that, but
Might have
months
been a
and
little too
months.
long, but yeah, it was months.
It wasn't too long. It was Goldilocks. It was just right for me. But when you came in to tell us that you didn't know what the next thing was going to be, but you knew that you needed to find that next thing, you gave a long ramp. I was so not just appreciated by me, but your whole team. The fact that it was such a thoughtful transition, but I don't think you would have done that just for any job. There was a point where you feel an accountability for the team around you and an accountability because it's more than just a job.
We often say bring your whole self to work. But what that means, I think, tactically in this conversation is you celebrate the things that are important to the people, even if it has an impact that you did not foresee or expect on the business. And I remember that it's interesting you say about your reaction to people saying, "Hey, I'm pregnant." And you were like, "That's amazing. And let's celebrate that." I hadn't really picked up on this until you said that, but that was absolutely true. And it was actually the first place I'd ever worked where I had never been to a baby shower at work before, because every place I'd worked up until then, which was actually quite a few, you had to, it's the old adage, work like you don't have kids and you parent like you don't have work. Well, everyone who got pregnant worked like they weren't pregnant and waited till the bitter end because you knew that that wasn't going to be celebrated. And that was what had been my experience up until that point. And I didn't have kids, but for me, it was like, we don't talk about that. You just sort of whisper it on the side and then you make sure you have a good plan. And it really was very celebrated. And if somebody was pregnant, everybody knew, and they knew when the party was going to be, and they knew that Sarah had given them the hug or congratulated them or whatever. And it was just understood that that was a great thing for everybody. And I think that helped people bring their whole selves and their whole lives to the table. And that's really beneficial in the workplace because it pays off. And in my case, I did feel a close connection, but and stayed for months and gave a long notice. But I think many employees did. I was not unique in the way that I chose to transition and also in the way I chose to support the organization. That was very much the way people were because we showed up as our whole selves. It's interesting to think about the parental leave policy is certainly a kind of cornerstone of support for motherhood and parenthood. Are there other things along the way that you feel are really important for people who are listening? They're probably leaders in their own companies and have some level of influence and changing or influencing the way the organization supports working parents. Are there other things that you've observed are very good, both for the employee, but also for the company that maybe are still not the norm?
There was a point, and I don't remember when it was, when I realized I didn't have to be embarrassed to say that I enjoy working, and that doesn't make me a bad mother. Because I never understood why men can enjoy working and that doesn't make them a bad father. I don't know at what point that clicked. And I'm not going to say you don't have the guilt or the balance or all the other things that weigh on mothers. There became a point where I stopped being embarrassed to say that I enjoyed work. If there's anybody that is listening that has that twinge, like I get it, just put the shoe on the other foot and realize if you're going to have kids, you're probably going to work regardless of your gender because you have to actually have money to raise those kids. So, like, this is a natural thing that needs to happen. So don't question, oh, does this make me a bad mom or a bad dad or a bad whatever? There's something more recently, like literally like 2 weeks ago, that I learned that's like a skill that I used very naturally at work, but I didn't use so much with my kids. Sometimes there's so much that you learn from one to the other, but sometimes they don't always match. And I'm going to give credit. I learned this from Valerie Oswalt. She's now the CEO of Kodiak Cakes. And we were catching up just a couple of weeks ago. And she was saying she had learned this tool, which basically is if somebody comes and complains to you about something, there's a problem. Again, it could be an employee. And for me as a parent of adult kids, my initial instinct, if it's my kids, is to take that problem, absorb it, put it in my entire being, and then figure out how I'm going to solve it because I'm a solutions-oriented person. What I learned is that you actually have to take a moment and pause, being able to reflect on the problem that's being thrown in your direction and realize what item do they need right now? Do they need a toolbox? Do they need a tissue box? Or do they need a garbage bin? Working backwards, if you need a garbage bin and you just want to puke up whatever your problem is, but you're not looking for solutions, so you just need to vent, that's great. That can go over there and you can just auto-tune, put everything out of your mind, and you don't have to absorb what's being thrown at you. You just kind of channel that to the garbage. If you need a tissue box, a sympathetic / empathetic ear, depending on how much sympathy, empathy you're using. But ultimately, you're there to hear them out, reflexive question, but not solutions. Toolbox, totally different story. Now, toolbox is my default. Once you kind of know what the person needs, then you can adapt. And as a parent of adult children, that's a new muscle I'm learning. And I'm learning it from my professional experience.
I love that. So, toolbox, tissue box, garbage bin, I think was the third one.
Garbage doesn't have a box, so it doesn't really roll
Fair.
off the tongue, but if you've got a better metaphor for it, great, but that's what Val gave me, and I'm taking it.
Earlier, you said you got comfortable with saying you enjoy work and that, it brings you joy. But for men, there's probably, I'm assuming, not the hang up maybe here. Where do you think that comes from? Why do you think that is? That because I share that like earlier in my career, I would be like, I can't show that I'm enjoying this too much.
We're still new in the long-term scheme of women being part of the workforce. If you look at your parents, what percentage of your friends' parents had 2 working parents? For me, it was definitely sub 10%.
Same.
I was working crazy hours, I was traveling, so it wasn't like I had a defined time kind of a job. Throughout the course of our parents and our grandparents' lives, the men always worked. So it's not terribly surprising that if we didn't see it, we weren't going to think it's okay to be it. Abby takes this for granted. Of course, women work after they have kids. That's just kind of what you do. And there are plenty who don't. There are plenty who don't, but I do think the balance has shifted.
Yeah, I think that if you can't see it or don't see it, you don't necessarily feel comfortable being it. So you're in the role, you're working, and you enjoy it, but maybe don't always feel like you can say how much you enjoy it because you look around and there aren't others necessarily doing it, let alone doing it and enjoying it. I found that early on, I felt this very much with Miles when he was, starting to be of age where he understood where I went when I wasn't at the house. And I remember early on feeling this pressure and guilt, even with him, to pretend that I had to do it and like, okay, but I'm going to get back home to you and it's going to be great and I'm going to go work. But really, what I want to do is be with you. And I realized that I was subtly teaching him that work is this thing that we just do and suffer through it. And it's not there to enjoy. And you just kind of have to do it, which I don't want him to have that relationship with work. And that's not true. And it's not my authentic reason for going to work. And so I changed it. And now I'm very clear with him that it's something I enjoy and it has benefits for the household, but I enjoy my work. And I want him to see me enjoy my work. And he ended up going to a Montessori school and they call the morning period work. One of the things that they taught Rob and I around the same time I was kind of coming to this realization was we want you to call your work work, you go to work, and then we want them to come here and do work and they'll feel like they're doing work with you. And we want this to be a good thing. And so he goes
I
to
love this.
school and in the morning he does his work and he loves coming home and talking about his work and what work he did that day. And he has such joy and pride around that. And it made me really that full circle click of our children see how we respond to work. And if we want to break the cycle, showing joy for the thing we're doing, we're choosing it because of that. And yes, it has other benefits. And early on, there are very practical reasons we need to do it. But having it be something we can do with joy, I think really was an important lesson for me. And so you saying that for a while you didn't maybe present it that way, I definitely felt that way early in Miles' life.
How I felt about it versus how I presented it are probably 2 different things. It is so healthy, that pivot that you made, which, by the way, I did not do. I would tell my kids, "I have to go to work." Whether I was being apologetic to myself or to other people around me was very different than the way I acted with them. With them, I always said, "I have to go to work." Hearing you the way you just said it, it's like, wow, that was a real big mistake because, I mean, I don't think they have an unhealthy relationship with work, but it's not like I was helping the situation because I would say I would have to because otherwise, why would I not want to be with them?
Even today, I find myself wanting to say, I have to go to work. And so, for example, we're coming up on summer and he's like, where are you going to go next week? And I'm like, I will still be going to work. And he's like, but I don't have my school or my work. So why do you have it? And I want to say, I have to.
Mhm.
And I didn't. I caught myself last week when he was asking me and I was like, well, let's talk about that. My work schedule looks different from your work schedule, and that's okay. I want to talk about your leadership style and how you've built cultures, built companies. You've seen enough other types of leadership and leaders that I'm curious if you see things that you do differently because of your experiences of motherhood.
So there are lessons that you take from one to the other and vice versa, similar to what we were talking about, being able to give them what you didn't have. Being a mother just taught me to be a more empathetic leader, and that is good and bad. I have often been told that I exude a lot of empathy at work is a strength, and it is my kryptonite as well because I really absorb everything. And I remember when I became CEO at 360i, which was a job I didn't necessarily want. When it was presented to me, it was, "This job is yours, and if you don't take it, you're just going to get a different boss." And I was like, "Oh, I don't want a different boss, so I guess I'll take the CEO job." And that sounds very counter ambitious or whatever it is, but the thought of being at the top of the totem pole, I was really happy being number 2. And one of the hardest things for me when I became CEO was that I was taking now everybody's emotions onto the pillow with me at night. Everybody's problems, everybody's work issues, home issues, families they need to support, all of that. My pillow was not big enough to absorb everything that was coming with me every night. I slept terribly. I mean, I still don't sleep very well, but the empathy part that you can have for a finite number of children, no matter how many problems you're dealing with or different areas that you're dealing with, is very different when you start multiplying it by the hundreds, if not thousands. So that was always a challenge that I had, but it also made me a much more approachable leader, a much more responsive leader. It's funny, I get notes from people who will reach out to me out of the blue and say, "Hey, I just want you to know there was something that you had said to me when we were working together that had an impact on me." More often than not, it was based on the fact that they were relatively junior and I was very senior, and that I talked as if we had a high degree of parity, which I kind of believe we did. I didn't believe much in the hierarchy kind of stuff because I just really wanted to see what life was like for different people. And it could be, now that I'm saying this, could be a little bit of a therapy session, Amanda, but like it could be because I had such crappy bosses starting out. When that CEO said to me, "Well, that sucks that you're pregnant," that sits with you. And so you want to make yourself approachable and you want to actually actively listen to people and understand them. So I guess my empathy is a blessing and but it's also a bit of a kryptonite for me.
That's interesting to hear you talk about empathy as sort of the cornerstone of maybe motherhood and leadership for you. I think that probably resonates with many people listening. It certainly does for me. To be to show a lot of care requires a lot of empathy. Parenting in general requires a lot of care and a lot of empathy. Your children definitely don't see hierarchy, so I think that certainly models maybe some of that. Um,
No, it's just if I didn't want to say no, I would just say ask dad. That's hierarchy.
there you go. I do
No,
that.
terrible, terrible parenting.
I do that one too. I wanna talk a bit about the double-edged sword and kinda how you position that of empathy. What I heard you say is sometimes you can care so much that it can be hard. It weighs on you heavily and it can be hard to then move forward with some of the other things that you need to deal with, or at the very least it weighs on you to the point that it might even, it sounds like, impact sleep, other things. This is a pattern I see across working women. I've definitely been guilty of it myself. Sometimes I joke like there's things that'll roll off my husband's back, but for me, it's I need to carry the weight of it for some reason. For example, with my son or with my team. I'm curious if you have any tips on how you've been able to care deeply and empathize without it weighing on you personally, because I do think this is something that many women, it weighs on them deeply in a way that maybe it doesn't. And for me, it's definitely gotten more acute with motherhood.
I can't say that I have a good answer. And I can say that there are a number of attributes that I have that are superpowers and kryptonites. Makes you, I don't know, a deeper person, I guess. Like I'm a very candid person. That's great when you're in the client service business because people always know where they stand with you and you can kind of cut the bullshit and all that other stuff. And that's great. But then they know where they stand with you even when it's not so good. And that's always been great in my relationship with my kids. Like I've always been very candid with them. And you can say what mother isn't candid with their kids, but if you know, you know. Similar to empathy, my candor is one of those things that can be a double-edged sword, and I'm at the point of acceptance
Hmm.
of, you know what? The superpower part of it outweighs the other part, and I don't think I can train myself to be otherwise, and I don't wanna lose the superpower part of it.
What a powerful answer. I think that's very true that sometimes to be really deeply empathetic and to have all the good that comes with that, there's some maybe personal weight that you just accept because to dull it would otherwise maybe take away from some of the superpower or to find tips or ways around it. Maybe then you wouldn't feel as deeply or have as much empathy and candor. You just kind of take it.
I don't have good at tips, it's just that's I'm not saying everybody should really have sleepless nights or anything like that, but it is what it is.
But so much of the care and the deep empathy comes from really wanting to put your full self and your full energy, both the empathy piece and the candor piece, into the people around you, the team that you've built. And I think acknowledging that there's a weight to that is honest and real. And that there's probably, I don't have any tips either, frankly, for how to make that not weigh on you deeply. I think part of what makes it powerful and a superpower is that it does.
It's interesting. After I left 360i, Jared Belsky, who succeeded me, we got much closer on a personal level. He was like a work husband to me for so many years. After I left, I felt like we were able to talk about certain things at a different level because there was no power distance or anything like that. And he would talk about my candor being a blessing and a curse. And he would say, if people spent enough time with you, they would realize that your candor is purely a sign of care, but if not, you can come off as totally abrasive. When I started at Profitero years later, I realized that it was so true because I came in very candid. I said what I thought was going on with the company and what we needed to do and what needed to happen. It was to internal leadership. And people were just like, wow, that's a lot to absorb. It took some time, and it didn't help that it was during COVID, but it took some time to build relationships with people for them to see that the combination of the care and the empathy are all in service of literally just trying to help them be their best selves and not wasting their time with platitudes, not wasting their time with the layer that frankly is useless. But I had to earn my way in. It was a sobering lesson. I think Jared for kind of showing it to me and then learning how to deal with it.
If you had sort of two or three things that you think are essential for creating a great workplace for parents, not just moms, but all parents, what would you say if someone is building right now?
I think in general, psychological safety becomes critical. Making it be okay to talk about the yuck, whatever the yuck is. Look, you might not be building a company where you have the means to provide phenomenal parental leave policies, but let's put the turd on the table and talk about it or try to figure out creative solutions. It's not just about parental leave. I just think in workforces in general, but of course for parents in particular, you also have to be able to walk the talk. Some people might say this is heretical. I don't think there's such a thing as work-life balance. I really don't. I think there's what's right for you situationally at a particular time without losing sight of your North Star. And so you might take a veer to the left or to the right, or you might jump a few rungs, but in the end, you know what you want to be as a whole person. And so you might make different decisions along the way to do that. What I think employers have to do is create the space for people to be able to make those decisions and also recognize that you have a responsibility in your job. And I think I would say, all working mothers, I'm sorry, all working parents that have worked for me over the years, they were either good or not good, having nothing to do with whether or not they were parents. It had to do with whether or not they were good at their jobs. And if they needed to shut off for a few hours here or take this time or that time or whatever, you think I care? I didn't care. And I didn't care if you had a pet or you wanted to go do yoga or you wanted to like take a nap, whatever it was. As long as you got your job done, I don't want to dictate where and how, but here's the expectations of the job. Do what you need to do. And I think part of that was also because I'm a strictly religious person as it relates to observing the Sabbath. I mean, and other things, but observing the Sabbath, which meant that every Friday at sundown, whether sundown was at 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock, I would have to shut down. And you would think I didn't have a work ethic because, like, hey, she's shutting down at 4 o'clock. We have a big pitch on Monday or something like that. But it didn't matter. The work got done because if you have the work ethic, then you'll figure out a way to get it done. And so you have to create an environment that says, just get the work done. Nobody's sitting here like, watching the clock here.
And I've definitely observed that to be true about you, that you hold a high bar and a high standard, but you also hold high boundaries for yourself, and you create a space where other people can have those as well. And they don't have to look like yours, but the work still has to get done. So I think part of it sounds like creating the psychological safety is creating the environment where people can do their best work within the values and boundaries that make sense for them.
Well said.
Thank you, Sarah. I know we're at time, but this was a great conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited about this podcast. I can't wait to listen to all the new episodes coming out.
Thank you. So here's what I'm taking from this episode. The workplace cultures that are most supportive of parents are: 1, supportive of creating space, as Sarah says, to say the yuck out loud. It makes sense. When people feel comfortable bringing up hard stuff or challenging topics, workplaces are healthier, company performance is stronger, and people feel more loyalty and connection to the company too. 2, they judge the work, not the clock. And for Sarah, the flexibility earlier in her career was really key, and she continues to pay it forward in the culture she's created as a CEO. 3, they celebrate the good things in people's personal lives and have the policies they'd want for themselves and even their own children. Sarah certainly learned this through hard-earned personal experience. And finally, what Sarah says about leadership and empathy being a double-edged sword really resonated. Her strengths of empathy and candor come with trade-offs she's very self-aware of. If she were to try and be less empathetic or dull her feelings around these moments, the ones that sometimes keep her awake, where would that lead her? Would her empathy continue to be a strength? Her approach invites us to embrace our strengths and accept the trade-offs, not try to fix them. If you want to read the blog post with more insights from Sarah or hear more like this, check us out at nodefinition.com. Be sure to subscribe to get notified for new episodes. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave a rating and review. It takes just 2 seconds and really helps get the word out. If you were inspired by what Sarah shared, feel free to send this episode to someone in your life who could benefit. And remember, there's no one way to define a successful life. The best we can do is continue to define it for ourselves. All right, everyone, until next time, this is Amanda Malco with No Definition.